Hey folks, it's Colin from Commerce Gurus back with another WooCommerce speed optimization tutorial. In this video, we're going to take a look at our WooCommerce product category pages, or if you prefer, your product listing pages, sometimes called PLPs. This is part 3 of our current tutorial series. If you've not seen parts 1 and 2 yet, check out the links below. The good news, the really good news, is if you've followed along our tutorial series to date, there's actually not a lot for you to do on our product listing pages. Things are all pretty well optimized as it is, as you might have seen at the very end of part 2. There is, however, a few things that we can do to get our scores really looking very good on Pagespeed Insights. You'll see here, this is a speed test, hopefully at the end of this tutorial, that we'll be able to recreate. But you can see here we have a Pagespeed Insights of 100 out of 100 on mobile. How about that, folks? That's pretty good, isn't it? You can see here our core web vitals are also looking pretty good. First contentful paint 1.4 seconds, LCP largest contentful paint 1.7, and yeah, I mean not a lot to do actually to get the scores to this point. We've actually done some tweaks and improvements to the Shoptimizer WooCommerce theme, which is featuring obviously in this tutorial quite a bit in recent times. There were a few niggling issues around CLS, which is now down at a whopping 0 on mobile, which is great. And yeah, so let's get on. Let's have a look and see what we need to do to get these pages kicked into shape. So the first thing I've done since part 2 is I've gone ahead and actually filled out a hypothetical product category page on our demo site, hoodies and sweatshirts, and just actually populated in, instead of the regular demo data content, which is just the gray spacer data, I've just actually gone ahead and filled a few products out. Part 4 actually, folks, as well, just in case you're wondering, will deal with the PDPs, the single product pages or product description pages. We're going to cover that in a separate tutorial as the last part of this series. So today we're just going to be talking and looking directly at the product category pages. So let's have a look at WooCommerce itself. Let's go in and have a look at see what we've got set up in here. So so just to recap very quickly, Autoptimize, our current settings are, or what they should be, is you should basically only be using the HTML optimization, and we should have our lazy loading. Our logo is the only thing that we're excluding at the moment, and in extras we should have our logo also preloaded. That's just a very quick recap. One of the things I'm just going to show you that we're not actually currently using to achieve our scores, but things that come up and you hear about all the time are things like, well, we should be preloading the hero image or any of the images above the fold, and we should be excluding any images above the fold from lazy load. All very good advice. However, I've actually found and gone to the bother of writing scripts to actually do that on very complicated pages in WooCommerce, only to find that actually our scores were better without these. Now I'm going to include these code snippets in the comments below. I'll include links to them on GitHub. And you may choose to experiment with them, but I've actually found that our scores are actually, let me just take out that debug, we don't need that anymore. I found that our scores are actually consistently higher without preloading any of the above the fold images on these pages, which I thought was interesting in itself. So it is good wisdom, and again, I've seen in certain scenarios where those images are very big, that tends to be good advice. But in this particular scenario with Shoptimizer and the type of images that we're loading on these pages, we don't need them. But I'm going to include them. They may be relevant to you, and we'll come back to that a little bit later in this tutorial. So one of the first things that we're going to do, let me just come back to this page. One of the first things I'd highly recommend for all your PLPs, right, for all your category pages, make sure that you've got a category description and a category image. And you might ask me, well, why is that important? There's one very good reason why that's extremely important to you. I'm going to show it to you now. So one of the key things that when we're running Lighthouse and Pagespeed Insights, one of the key things that Google looks for is the largest contentful paint time. Okay. Now, if you don't have a category image at the top of the page here on mobile, your LCP is actually going to be made up of one or both of these images here, which means that your LCP needs time to load 2 images as opposed to 1. And the other thing is, depending on the size of your product images, they may end up being bigger, larger than than your category image. So I would always recommend that you actually have a category image, a feature category image for all your categories. Now, if you're not familiar with how to add those, we have documentation in the Shoptimizer documentation which goes through that, but I'm just going to show you very quickly here how we've added this one to this particular category. Just go into WordPress, have a quick look. So we go into our categories page here, and we click into hoodies and sweatshirts, which is our category page. You'll see here there's a thumbnail. That's the image. That's our category image. You can see here's our description. Okay, so as long as you've got these two filled out, you're in business. All right. The size of that image is important. So I actually can't remember now what size we recommend off the top of my head, but I'll just double check because I know when I set this up, I made sure. So 730 by 450. Okay, you can see there width 730 by 450. So ideally, your category image should be that size. Yeah, you can play around with this, but you don't want it to be much bigger than that. Certainly not much bigger, that's for sure. But what you want to do is try and make sure that it looks correct on both desktop and mobile, which that one does. So if you follow that as a general good rule of thumb, you'll be in a good place. But what, as I said, just to recap, what that will do is it'll ensure that for your LTP, it's just a single image that Google is looking for as opposed to 2. So just to show you our current PSI score for this page, this is the one we prepared earlier, but let me just jump over and show you. So on a fresh test, just to see how we're currently doing. You see we're in pretty good shape already. $98, not to be sniffed at. You can see here LTP is 2.1, speed index 2.4. Now there's some opportunities here around eliminating render blocking resources. So really, to be honest with you, we're going to spend some time looking at this. Now, properly resizing images, I'm not actually that worried about this here. Google will always be very aggressive in terms of recommending image optimization recommendations. And quite frankly, you know, if you're hitting scores like this and your LTP is down around 2.1, you can take some of these opportunities with a pinch of salt. You don't really need to sacrifice image quality any further if you're up in this neck of the woods. Now we're going to make some little tweaks, and we're going to talk about images in general in a moment, but you know, you don't have to adhere, you don't have to break good usability principles just because Google is suggesting so. One of the things that I did want to talk about just very quickly, speaking of images, is in WooCommerce itself, or in the customizer rather, you'll find that we have some recommended image sizes, which are important. Okay, so if you click into WooCommerce and you click product images, now if you've been following along with the Shoptimizer installation guide from when you installed the theme originally, you should have changed these settings to 800 for your main image, which is the main single image on PDPs, and the thumbnail size to be 300. Now these are actually, I think the default WooCommerce one's actually 6, but we've recommended 800 as the default width on single PDPs, and 300 actually is the default with WooCommerce. But the thing that's not the default in WooCommerce, WooCommerce by default will make your product listing pages squares. Okay, so it'll default to 1-on-1. And what we recommend is to actually have your image settings to be uncropped. So basically this means that the editorial decisions that you make about your images should be done outside of WooCommerce, which is good advice for any e-commerce platform, to be honest with you. You shouldn't really just be delegating control of how your images look just to WooCommerce. In fact, what you'll tend to see happen when you do that is if you set this to be a 1-on-1 crop, you'll end up seeing that, for example, this chap's head will get cut off, or this lady's head here will get cut off, and you'll be wondering, oh, why is it, what's happening? And then sometimes the image, the crop positions that are selected by default from WooCommerce, you don't get any control over those. Or if it creates a 300 by 300 pixel image here, what'll end up happening is actually on a large high resolution desktop screen, they'll look quite blurry. And you say, why do they look blurry? They're 300 by 300, that's the right size. It's because basically what's happening under the surface here in WooCommerce, what's happening is, and in WordPress, what's actually happening is you actually have a whole heap of different size of images here that are loaded in. So actually the image that's been loaded here, as you can see, is 768 by 976, which is quite a bit bigger than the space available for that image to load. And basically this is just responsive images using source set, fairly standard stuff, but sometimes can be quite confusing. And if it's completely left to chance, your mileage is going to vary massively. So I would always recommend control the editorial experience of your images outside of WooCommerce. Bring them into WooCommerce exactly as you want to display them. Set this to be uncropped, and your images will display as you originally intended. You'll see here's an example when, and this was intentional just to show you, both of these are uncropped. So the original image sizes were different. So that's the other thing to be aware of, is be consistent with your image sizes. So for example, our demo data, we've always said 1280 by 1500. You don't have to stick to this. That's just a recommendation. In fact, I think with the images I've selected here, let me just have a look. I'm pretty sure I think this is quite a bit bigger. If I remember correctly, let's have a quick look. Yeah, 107. Well, actually, that's a thumbnail. So the original is, 2000 pixels wide, right? So, yeah, I mean, you can play with that and you can experiment with it. But again, the most important thing, to avoid seeing inconsistent heights on your thumbnails on your category pages, is to make sure that the original images are all the same size. Okay, so I thought I'd mention that just at the top of this section, because it's one thing we see quite frequently is just issues with, for example, your image has been way too big, or you haven't set those settings in WooCommerce that I've just shown you, or you've got different sizes because you're expecting WooCommerce to do this all for you. And look, there's lots of themes out there. WooCommerce by default will create 300 by 300 pixel square images here. And they don't tend to look great with lots of different types of products. All right, so let's get on with it. So what else do we need to do here on this page to try and get our scores bumped up a little bit? So one thing which we installed in one of our earlier tutorials back in March of 21 was when we did original Core Web Vitals video. We used a plugin called Asset Cleanup, and Asset Cleanup is fantastic, as you've probably seen now if you've used it. And there is actually a pro version of the plugin available, and I'm going to recommend it, and I'll tell you why. If you actually use the free version and you get all that value for free, the one thing it doesn't cover are pages like the WooCommerce category pages. Okay, so that's what you would need the pro version for. Okay, so I highly recommend it. Gabriel, the plugin developer, is fantastic. I've interacted with him on a number of different occasions. He's provided additional not fixes, he's actually provided different additional compatibility options in the pro version based on some feedback I gave him for some weird behavior in some legacy versions of old plugins. So really good support, and it unlocks all of these additional areas of WordPress and WooCommerce that you might want to do further removal of HTTP requests. So I will link directly to the Asset Cleanup Pro page here. You can see it's ridiculously inexpensive for the amount of value you're getting for one site. It's 38 euros a year, or dollar equivalent. I can't remember what the dollar equivalent, but it's pretty good. And you want to basically download that, install it, and then when you go back into WordPress, one thing you'll need to remember here is to deactivate the free version. So I'm going to deactivate the free version here, and I'm going to activate the pro version. And once you activate the pro version and you go to settings, one thing I'd recommend is in the plugin usage preference is to switch on manage in the front end. And what that allows you to do is make some of these kind of edge case pages easier to find in asset cleanup. So sometimes it can be difficult to find them in the back end. When you actually then enable the asset cleanup front end, you can see here now, if I go to Asset Cleanup Pro and I click Manage Page Assets, you'll see they pop up right from the front end, which is very, very handy. Now, so what are we going to DQ? What are we going to remove from our product listing pages? Well, one set of things that you can get rid of on the PLPs is Elementor. And one way you can quickly do that is to choose the check all option. So we're not using Elementor anywhere on product listing pages. I'll just go back to them now. I'll click into, that's the easiest way of me getting back to the hoodies and sweatshirt page. So we don't have any Elementor content in here whatsoever. Now, your mileage might vary. If you're using Elementor for something on these pages, or you're using some additional functionality in your WooCommerce installation that allows you to use Elementor here, you obviously won't want to DQ and remove Elementor. Quite frankly, I don't think you need it personally. You've got a featured image here. You've got your description. That can all be done as we've just looked at a little bit earlier in this video. So one thing you can do very quickly here now is check all, which will immediately remove all of those Elementor requests that we touched on in our video back in March when we went through all our core web vitals, that we really don't recommend removing these on other pages, but on our product listing pages, absolutely, we can get rid of them. And the other thing we want to do is, I'm always wary of touching any WooCommerce files for obvious reasons, but there are two here that we're not using. Again, we're not using any of the, at the moment, currently using any of the newer WooCommerce blocks, so we can get rid of both of those. I think that was it. Oh yes, and this is a weird one. This is from our own Shoptimizer theme, and again, we do conditionally load JavaScript and CSS files as much as possible. Now, the blog one is currently being loaded on the archive pages. That will probably change in the future. Again, we're always continuously changing and tweaking how our CSS and JS files load. But for the moment, we're just going to remove the blog file. There can be occasions where you do have blog elements appear on your PLPs. For example, if you're loading some recent blog posts here, you probably wouldn't want to get rid of it. So again, your mileage will vary, but in this scenario, we're going to remove it. I think that was it, if I remember correctly. Yes. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and update that. And as usual, go back. I'm just going to purge the page cache here. And let's go back and have a look and see what that does. Just that single set of changes in asset cleanup. Let's see what that does. Did I warm up the cache? I don't think I did. Let's warm up the cache. Otherwise, Pagespeed Insights is our guinea pig for hitting our cold cache. And actually, even with that, it was hitting 99. But let's just see now with a warmed up cache where we get to. What we're looking for here, I'm not overly concerned if it's in 99 and 100. What I do like to see is to see the LCP drop under 2 seconds, which is fantastic. That makes me very, very happy when we can achieve that. And again, you can see no CLS, very, very little blocking time at all, speed index 1.6. You can see here how early it is, how early we're loading, which is excellent. I'm just going to try it one more time just to see if that's consistently loading now. That's the other thing to do. I know I've mentioned this in some previous videos. It's worth mentioning again. Always run your tests several times. I mean, if you want to be really scientific and accurate about it, you should be running it like 10 or 20 times. But even 3 to 4 times gives you a real sense of, you know, how well you're faring overall as an average. A fair average in terms of performance helps to weed out some, you know, inconsistent behavior on your own server or from PSI servers as well. So again, look, you can see now there we're getting our LCP down into the 1.7 seconds range, which is really, really good on mobile. We're not quite hitting the 100 mark there, but we're getting pretty close. And you will see even with that, and you'll see obviously we haven't been looking at desktop at all. Of course, we're hitting the 100 here, no problem at all. But mobile 99, I'm very, very happy with that. I'm going to run it one more time just to see if we can achieve the 100 at all. And you will see variations from time to time like this where that does happen. 99. Okay, we're stuck at 99, but that's okay. And yeah, the other thing I wanted to show you is just to have a look at those snippets that we've talked about, right? So we spent a bit of time creating these snippets, assuming we'd need them, and we're going to switch them on now. So the first thing we're going to do is looking at excluding the category thumbnail from Lazy Load. Again, this code will be, links to this code will be in the description below. So basically, just for the uninitiated, what we're doing here is we're hooking into a Autoptimize filter for how to add additional images to their Lazy Load exclusions. And the reason why you would want to exclude images from Lazy Load, there's a really good example there. Okay, so you can see what's happened here is, if you can see my cursor, is the image hasn't yet loaded in here. And the main reason, well, there's two reasons. That could just be a regular image taking a bit of time to download, or more commonly nowadays is because all images are lazy loaded. What's happening here is that there's an empty data source attribute on an image, and it's waiting for JavaScript to actually fully load on the page before it then swaps out what's in the viewport and swaps the image in. So that's one of the reasons why speed experts recommend not lazy loading any images above the fold in the viewport. Okay, so hence why we come up with this code here. In Autoptimize, you could start excluding images one by one, but where's the fun in that? So this particular code here, which I've written for you, and you can create and add as a code snippet. Again, we've mentioned this in our previous videos, very easy to do. And what this will actually do, let me just take out that little debug and just save it. What this will do is it'll automatically add any of your product category images automatically to the lazy load exclusions list, so you don't have to go through and add those one by one. So that saves you a ton of time, saves you a ton of heartache. You just basically load this code and the snippet will do it for you. So now I've just enabled that. Let me just purge the cache. Let me just warm up the cache again, and we'll see if that makes any difference. Now, again, my recent tests today would suggest we don't need it, because again, we're down to a game of inches here where our pages are already performing so well at this point in time that doesn't really make much difference. Now, you'll see here, what's interesting is what you'll notice now is we don't see that lazy load effect that I just mentioned. So you can see here, the minute the page renders, the image loads, right? So we've removed that lazy load effect on the image, which is exactly what we wanted to do. However, have a look. Our LTP, our largest contentful paint, is no longer sub 2 seconds. It's now 2 seconds on the nose. Now I've seen this go up to be 2.3 and 2.4. So it's not actually achieving the desired effect. All right, which is one of the reasons why at the moment, from the outset of this tutorial, I'm saying your mileage is going to vary on this. This is something you're going to want to test yourself on your own site. When we use it in combination, typically when you exclude an image from lazy load like that, the other thing you want to do, let me just find the right tab. The other thing you want to do, if it's a hero image or a featured image like this, is the other thing you're going to want to do is preload it. All right, a number of different preloader scripts written here. So what this one here does is, similarly to the lazy load exclusion filter, we also in Autoptimize have a preload filter that we can add images to. So again, what we're doing here is, I have it off for the moment. Let me just activate this. So what this code will do is, on your PLP pages, it'll pluck out the featured image and it'll actually preload it just like how we're preloading our logo. All right, which you'll remember from our previous Autoptimize configuration. So again, means that you don't have to manually go into Autoptimize. And just to show you where these are manually managed in Autoptimize, and there's the lazy load exclusions, and here's our preload additions. So it's basically the filters for these input boxes. So you could start adding, you can see here, I was testing here, you could start adding these manually. But the other reason I don't recommend doing that, and you'll see as it's referred here to be sparingly, you don't want to start adding manual additions to the preload list here, because they're preloaded on every single page, which you absolutely don't want to do. Why would you be preloading this image when you're on any one of these other categories? You only want this to be preloaded on this category page when this is loaded. So the code that I've written here will do that. It'll do exactly that, right? So let's just again purge our cache. Slide now. Let's warm it up. Let's then go back over and see if that has any material impact. I again suspect that it won't. The other thing, of course, anytime you preload an image like this, is if you remember from some of our previous videos, you are now blocking the CSS, that you're blocking the waterfall from getting to your CSS. Your images will be loading before the CSS file loads. So if the image is particularly big, it's something to avoid, which goes against conventional wisdom on what you should be doing. But more and more I'm seeing that there are many cases where preloading an image and excluding from lazy load don't deliver the promises that they do. But again, you can see here now on this test run, I'm seeing slightly different results to what we've seen earlier. So you can see now our LCP on that last one was 1.7. So let's run it again, see what happens. 1.9, right? So again, it looks, into even here now, you can see just in terms of as the page loads, first time content paints a little bit earlier. So look, your mileage will vary on this stuff. And the reason why I'm kind of flip-flopping a little bit here is just because our scores are so good now. You're really into diminishing returns territory now at this point. And it's not something I expect that this kind of stuff is going to evolve actually over the next year as even Pagespeed Insights tweaks how they calculate things like the largest contentful paint and things like that. So, and certainly, look, every site's going to be different. If you have a lot more JavaScript running than we do in our demo, you might find that actually excluding this image from the lazy loader has a huge impact for you. And that's one thing we see. On sites where you've got a heavy JavaScript payload, excluding your images will probably make a much bigger difference than what you're seeing here. But again, we recommend that you don't have so much JavaScript, so hence why we're seeing kind of debatable results as to whether it's useful or not. But look, we've given you the code, so it's there and it's worth you experimenting and seeing how it works on your own store. So that is basically it for this part. In the next tutorial, we're going to have a look at our PDP pages. So if you remember correctly for some of the earlier videos, we had a quick look at how some of these pages are scoring. And look, these are particularly challenging pages because we can have quite a lot of images. And again, for the purpose of this demo, I've built out a product page with a lot more images in it than it otherwise would have had. So, this is something hopefully that we'll be able to see. Again, look, these pages are pretty good. Look, if I have a look at, just put it through Pagespeed Insights to show you right now, there's a possibility that you wouldn't have to do anything with these pages at all at this point. They're probably hitting high 80s or early 90s, hopefully, without doing anything else. And you'll see, okay, so in this instance, it's a lot longer, probably wasn't cached. Some of those images are there, right? So that's hitting 70. So look, and again, that's not unheard of. That's quite common to see that on PDPs. Can be quite tricky to optimize because there's so many images on them, which is what we're seeing here. And you can see, look, it's just because there was probably a code, was probably seeing the effect of the cache wasn't warmed up correctly on that last run. But again, it's not unusual to see a flip-flop, right? Especially if you've got any dynamic scripts running on that page. So run it, what, we hit 70 there, previous 93 last time. Let's see what we're hitting now. 92. Okay, so that's probably a fair reflection than what we saw originally, but yeah. So look, would I be happy running a site like this with these scores today? Absolutely. You can see your LTP is 2.1 seconds. CLS is negligible at 0.04, But look, we'll come back to this is a pet hate of mine, by the way, and we'll see this in our next video. The default WooCommerce opacity, it transitions on images, which is absolutely crazy and something that we'll look to try and solve. It's tricky, but we'll have a look at that when we get to it. So, all right, that's it for today. And let me know how you get on. If you had any issues or have any strange or weird behaviors on your category pages, please let me know in the comments below or drop us an email on our support channel. And yeah, we will talk to you next time.